didn't own it. And what about the Southeastern Conference? Is it RIP for the SEC? And do you still believe in Kalen DeBoer? All that and more on today's episode of Scarbo Knows with me, Kevin Scarbinsky. Next. It has been 5 days since Alabama's Rose Bowl beatdown. We cannot leave it in the dust. We have to address it, dissect it, and then move beyond it and try to figure out, where does Alabama football go from here after Indiana 38, Alabama 3. It brought Kalen DeBoer to tears in the postgame. That is an actual photo of the Alabama coach after getting embarrassed by the Indiana Hoosiers and Curt Cignetti, looking like death warmed over, chewing on a rose. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. Welcome to the first edition of 2026 of Scarbo Knows. We took a little holiday hiatus to spend some time with family. I hope you did as well. But we are back, and we are off and running in the new year. I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Money Management Services, Birmingham's financial services firm. They've been in business since 1992, also known as the good old days for Alabama football, when they won a national championship and beat the Miami Hurricanes, when they were the upstart underdog, undervalued, underrespected team that won a national title, much like Indiana this year. The Rice family, they've been good friends of mine for a long time. They will take great care of you. We will hear from them later in the show. Make sure you scan the QR code to reach out to Money Management Services. Also want to say thank you to Brendan Martin, the outstanding executive producer of the Sidelines.live network, where you can watch Scarbo Knows and so many great shows every day, virtually all day long, either live or on demand. Make sure you check those out as well. So let's get to it. Happy New Year, everyone. Well, unless you're an Alabama football player, coach, fan, staffer, booster, etc., etc., etc. I have to admit, I didn't see it coming. And if you watched the last episode of Scarbo Knows, you know I didn't see it coming, because I predicted that Alabama would win the game. I thought it would be a close game. I thought Alabama would find a way in the fourth quarter. I thought Ty Simpson would make more clutch plays than Fernando Mendoza. And I haven't been that wrong since the 1993 Sugar Bowl, when Alabama took on swaggering Miami in New Orleans. And I, at the time, David Letterman, for those of you who have some experience under your belts, you remember the David Letterman in The Late Show. He used to do a top 10 list. And I did a column in the form of a top 10 list of reasons why Alabama had no shot to beat Miami. And, of course, Miami beat down Alabama in that national championship game in the Sugar Bowl. And the game wasn't over by 5 minutes. And I'm walking through the bowels of the New Orleans Superdome, going towards the post-game interview areas, and Alabama fans, giddy, gleeful, and spiteful, saw me, recognized me, and reminded me in very sharp terms how wrong I was in picking Alabama to lose to Miami. I don't think I've been this wrong since then. Indiana 38, Alabama 3. I said this in my column yesterday on AL.com. That's where you can find it. Alabama should take that score. They should put it on posters and paper the walls throughout the football building with it. They should play it on a loop on every screen in the football building. They should print T-shirts with that score on it. Print them in different colors. And throughout spring practice, throughout winter workouts first, then spring practice, then fall camp, Every day from now until September 5th, when Alabama opens next season against East Carolina, they should be reminded of what happened on January 1st, 2026. How bad was it? Let's look at some of the details. You already know most of this by now. It was the worst loss for Alabama football since 1998, when a man named Mike DuBose was the head coach. Arkansas beat them that day 42-6. The worst postseason loss, including playoffs and bowl games, ever in Alabama history. The first bowl game or postseason game Alabama played in which it did not score a touchdown since the 1964 Sugar Bowl. I was 2 years old. That's how long ago that was. Alabama actually won that game over Ole Miss 12-7 because they kicked 4 field goals, but they didn't score a touchdown. And in addition, and I don't know how many people have noticed this, but I did the math. Since the 4-team playoff began, or playoff in general started with 4 teams back in 2014, the SEC has played 34 playoff games. It has won 21 of them. It has lost 13 of them. Alabama's loss to Indiana was the worst SEC playoff loss in the history of the college football playoff. A 35-point margin. The previous record, dubiously held by Nick Saban in Alabama after the 2018 season when they got smoked by Clemson in the national championship game 44-16. So Kalen DeBoer outdid Nick Saban once again, this time to the negative. Now, I know what you're saying. Don't put it all on Alabama. Give Indiana credit. And we should give Indiana credit. We should give Curt Cignetti all the roses, all the flowers for what he has done in 2 years at IU. Historically, the worst power conference football program in the country. But Indiana didn't look like this all year long. They didn't do this to every team they played. In fact, if you look at the numbers, and I did, 6 of the first 13 opponents that Indiana played before Alabama held the Hoosiers to fewer points than Alabama did. 7 of the teams that Indiana played before Alabama, more than half, 7 of 13, with my basic knowledge of math, tells me that's more than half. 7 of 13 played Indiana to a closer final margin. And 11 of the 13 teams that Indiana played before Alabama scored more points against the Hoosiers than the pitiful 3 that Alabama put on the board. And in every one of those categories included Old Dominion. In the first game of the year, Old Dominion lost to Indiana 27-14. Now, this is a much better Indiana team today than it was back in late August. There's no doubt about that. That's what good coaches do. That's what the best programs do. That's what the best coaching staffs do. They develop their team throughout the year. They get better, and they play their best football when their best football is required in the postseason. And that is exactly what Curt Cignetti and Indiana have done. All credit to them. But they're not the 1972 Miami Dolphins. And they did to Alabama what they have done to few teams in the this 2-year run that Cignetti has put together in Bloomington. So there's credit and there's blame, and it goes in equal parts to Indiana on the good side, Alabama on the negative. But we have focused so much because that game was so ugly, because it was something few people saw coming. We're still fixated on it. Someone asked me today on a radio show, when do you think Alabama will be over this? Or is Alabama over this game? And I said, Alabama will never be over this game. They should never be over this game. This should drive them every single day, as I said, from now until opening day of the 2026 season. But this season, Kalen DeBoer's second in Tuscaloosa was not all failed 4th and 1 calls. It was not all the running game becoming a running joke. There were good things. So let's look at the silver lining. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. I'm getting out of order here. I'm getting a little too excited. That's the bad of the Rose Bowl. Let's look at the bad of the season. How bad was the Alabama season? And it sounds strange to say that when this team went 11-4. But let's look at some of the historically bad, epic failures of this Alabama team. They lost 4 games by a combined 72 points. By comparison, Auburn lost 7 games and fired its coach, but the total margin was 50 points. This was, as we said, the worst SEC championship game loss ever for Alabama. They got beat by 3 touchdowns by Georgia in Atlanta on the first Saturday in December. As we've also noted, worst bowl loss ever to Indiana, 38-3. Here's one that absolutely has to change. The worst rushing average for a season by any Alabama football team since 1955, when the Crimson Tide was coached by a guy named Ears Whitworth, who led to the hiring of Bear Bryant. 104.1 yards per game Alabama averaged in 2025-2026. That is unacceptable. That is unsustainable. And if it doesn't change significantly next year, we may be having an entirely different conversation this time, the first week of 2027. And here's one that's kind of unusual, but it stood out to me. The first Alabama team to lose both its first and last games of a season since 2000. Who was the coach at Alabama in 2000? Here's that name again, Mike DuBose. If you are being compared to Mike DuBose in any way, shape, or form as an Alabama football coach, you are in a bad way. 2000 was the year Mike DuBose coached his last game, his last season at Alabama. Got fired after a 9-0 loss in the Iron Bowl against Auburn. But again, it wasn't all bad news. It wasn't all overcast skies, rainstorms, which they saw in Southern California. Maybe that was a clue leading up to the Rose Bowl, the unusual weather that they had in Southern California that week. There were good things that happened to Alabama, and we can't ignore those. We shouldn't ignore those. There was a silver lining to the 2025-26 season. Let's look at some of the positives. They did snap Georgia's 33-game home win streak. And Georgia, of course, won the SEC, got to the college football playoff, and went one and done as they had done last year. But still, winning in Athens when no one had done it in about 6 years, that's a positive. Alabama became the first SEC team with 4 straight ranked wins in 4 consecutive weeks. Now, in hindsight, knowing that each of those 4 teams, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and Tennessee, each lost its final game of this season, kind of knocked some of the luster off of that accomplishment, but still it was an accomplishment. Alabama became the first 3-loss team to earn an at-large college football playoff berth, much to the chagrin of much of the college football nation outside the southeastern portion of the country. Clemson had 3 losses last year, but they got in by winning the ACC championship game. Alabama got an at-large bid with its 3 losses, which gave us some hope that strength of schedule is going to mean something going forward. This was also Alabama's first college football playoff victory since 2021, when a man named Nick Saban won the semifinal game and then lost the championship game to Georgia. Alabama, of course, tied the largest college football playoff comeback after they were down 17-0 at Oklahoma. That's a significant accomplishment, and you cannot take that away from this team. That was also the 3rd largest comeback in Alabama history, or tied for it. That's a positive. And Kalen DeBoer became the only coach in the history of the college football playoff, which dates to 2014, to win a game in the playoff with 2 different schools. Those are positives. You can't ignore them. You shouldn't ignore them. You should give Kalen DeBoer credit for them. But it's not enough. It's not what Alabama expects. And to make matters worse, we are now a couple of days away from the semifinals of the college football playoff. There are 4 teams left competing for a national championship. And it doesn't do Kalen DeBoer any favors that each of those 4 teams is coached by a former student of Nick Saban. Ironic, isn't it? That the school that Nick Saban put back on the map, the school where Nick Saban became the GOAT, the greatest of all time among college football coaches, that school is not coached by a Saban disciple. But Miami, Ole Miss, Indiana, and Oregon, the 4 teams still competing for a national championship, they are all coached by guys who grew up and learned at the right hand of Nick Saban. This is not a positive for Kalen DeBoer, and it raises a lot of questions. And let me dispel one would-be scenario. I've seen many people mention this on Twitter. Why didn't Alabama hire Curt Cignetti when it had the chance 2 years ago? Because he's been at Indiana for 2 years. Kalen DeBoer has been at Alabama for 2 years. But the timing didn't work. Indiana hired Curt Cignetti far before Nick Saban retired. Alabama didn't know it was going to be changing coaches until after the Rose Bowl that year when they lost to Michigan. So the timing wasn't right. It wasn't as if Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletic director, had a choice and looked at, say, Curt Cignetti versus Kalen DeBoer versus Mike Norvell. They dodged a bullet there, didn't they? He was on the short list. They didn't choose Kalen DeBoer over Curt Cignetti. And I will put it to you that no one, not the smartest football mind in America, whoever that person might be, would have told you 2 years ago that if you had a choice at that time of hiring Kalen DeBoer from the University of Washington, who was on his way to the national championship game where they lost to Michigan, or you could hire Curt Cignetti from James Madison, who would you take? 99.9% of athletic directors, boosters, search firms, college presidents, well-heeled boosters would have chosen Kalen DeBoer. So far, again, that wasn't a choice. All right, so let's eliminate that talking point that's popped up on social media since the Rose Bowl. Since then, obviously, Curt Cignetti's been the best coach in the country. Better than Kalen DeBoer, better than Kirby Smart, better than Dan Lanning, better than Mario Cristobal, bar none. No doubt. We'll see if he can sustain it. I don't know that anyone can sustain the level of excellence that he's achieved at Indiana over the last 2 years. If you can get a 2-year run these days, somewhat similar to what Indiana has done, you have done something outstanding. But having these 4 guys in the semifinals, again, it just reminds people, which we didn't really need reminding of, that Kalen DeBoer is not Nick Saban. But guess what? Curt Cignetti's not Nick Saban. Neither is Dan Lanning, nor Mario Cristobal, nor Pete Golding. Although I would say, for the season, Curt Cignetti deserved to be, as he was, the winner of the National Coach of the Year award for the 2nd straight year. But if you wanted to give a playoff Coach of the Year award to this point, it would have to go to Pete Golding. You have to admire the job he's done, keeping that team together through all the chaos created by Lane Kiffin, aided by the calendar, but created by Lane Kiffin and his decisions. And Pete Golding has done an outstanding job, and he outcoached Kirby Smart in the second half of the Sugar Bowl, particularly in the 4th quarter. There's no doubt about that. And Kirby's as good as it gets long-term right now, but Golding outcoached him. We'll see if he can sustain it. So we have one SEC team left out of the 4. And it has been pile on the SEC postseason for a month now. Everyone's suggesting it's RIP for the SEC. That the run of all those national championships by all those different programs over all those years is done, over, dead, buried, gone, and you will never see it again because everybody can pay players now. And if you are under the illusion that before NIL, the SEC was the only conference that had teams that were paying players under the table, I've got some oceanfront property to sell you in Iowa. Come on now. We know better than that. But these numbers are disturbing. And we broke it down into 3 categories. The SEC versus the Big Ten, the 2 big dogs, the Power 2. Since the college football playoff started in 2014, I mentioned this earlier, the SEC is 21-13 overall. The Big Ten is 14-11. No comparison. Advantage SEC. Since NIL started in July of 2021, all of a sudden those numbers look a lot different. The SEC is 10-9 since then. In the playoff, the Big Ten is 11-7. Advantage Big Ten. And since the 12-team playoff started a year ago in 2024, the numbers look even uglier for the Southeastern Conference. The Big Ten is 9-4 in the 12-team playoff. The SEC is 5-7. Not good. Not good, Bob Baumhauer. Not good at all. Of course, a big portion of that is Ohio State going 4-0 last year to win the national championship. And now here's Indiana and Oregon. The Big Ten has 2 teams in the Final Four. The ACC has 1 in Miami, and the lone representative of the SEC is Ole Miss. And if you're not pulling for an Indiana Ole Miss national championship game, what are you even doing? What are you even thinking? If you appreciate the fact that history doesn't have to be a death sentence, that you can change history, that you can adapt and adjust, and the Grove Collective and Ole Miss and Walker Jones, what they have done has been unbelievable. They are setting a standard of how to operate in the NIL era. But that's the game I want to see. I'm not really picking these games. I think Indiana's going to win. I think Indiana's going to win the national championship. But I like Ole Miss to beat Miami. And I would love to see Ole Miss play Indiana in the national championship game. That would turn college football on its ear in a way that nothing else has to this point. So let's circle back to where we started. Alabama. Where does the Crimson Tide go from here? Do you still believe, if you did believe beforehand, in Kalen DeBoer? Let's look at some numbers first before we draw a little bit of a conclusion. In his last 2 years, and it is not a fair comparison to look at Nick Saban's first 2 years at Alabama versus Kalen DeBoer's first 2 years at Alabama. That was the Stone Age in 2007 and 2008 compared to where we are now in college football. And obviously, it's advantaged Saban in virtually every one of these categories. More overall wins, 23-4 to DeBoer's 20-8. Better SEC record, 14-2 to DeBoer's 12-4. They both went to one SEC championship game. Saban in his last 2 years, DeBoer in his first 2 seasons. Saban won it in 2023. He beat Georgia. DeBoer, of course, infamously lost 28-7 to Georgia back in December. And in the college football playoff, we should note Nick Saban did not win a playoff game his last 2 years. He had one opportunity. He lost in overtime to Michigan in the Rose Bowl, which I guess is better than losing by 35 points in the Rose Bowl in the quarterfinals. But Kalen DeBoer did win a playoff game. He did withstand the avalanche at Oklahoma. First playoff game Alabama had won since 2021. So again, props to him. Here's the real question. Is Kalen DeBoer the guy for Alabama long-term? Now, when I ask, do you believe in Kalen DeBoer? If the question is, do you believe in Kalen DeBoer to somehow become Nick Saban? It's not even, there's no good answer because it's not the right question. No one is going to be Nick Saban going forward. Curt Cignetti may become the closest thing to Nick Saban. He may take that title from Kirby Smart, but he's not going to do over the next, well, if he's 64 years old, so he's likely not going to be coaching for the next 17 years. But he's not going to do for the long term, over the long term, what Nick Saban did at Alabama. It's not possible. It's a different game, a different world. But the question really is, do you believe in Kalen DeBoer to get Alabama to a point where it really is right now? He achieved this in his second year, competing for an SEC championship, competing for a national championship, which means getting to the playoff. Kalen DeBoer did those things. It didn't go well when he got to Atlanta. It didn't go well when he got to the quarterfinals of the playoff, but he got to the playoff and he got to the SEC championship game. Now, how do you go beyond that? How do you travel the distance? He called it, I'm hoping this was something he said in the heat of the moment, the emotion of the season ending. After the Rose Bowl, when he said there's a fine line between where Alabama sat at that moment and getting to where they really wanted to go, which was winning the national championship game. That's not a fine line. That's a Grand Canyon. From there to winning that game and winning a semifinal and winning a title game, Alabama was not close. It was not a fine line between where they were and where they wanted to go. So I hope he didn't truly believe that in his heart, because if he truly believes that in his heart, he won't make the necessary changes that will have to be made if Alabama is going to be a true national championship contender, which means getting to the title game and eventually winning it. I think he's capable of doing it. When you ask me, do I believe in Kalen DeBoer? I will say yes. It's a qualified yes. It's a yes with an asterisk. If he will commit to building a running game that can get a yard between the tackles on 4th and 1, if you decide to go for it on 4th and 1 from your own 34 at the end of the first quarter in a playoff game, and you do not feel compelled to run a jet motion pop pass to a wide receiver to try to get that yard, then I'll believe in Kalen DeBoer. He's already made some good strides in that direction. Signed one of the best high school running backs in years in Alabama in E.J. Crowell from Jackson. They won the last 2 state championships by absurd margins. He is the real deal. He will be as talented a running back as Alabama has had the day he steps on the practice field since Najee Harris in 2020. I feel confident in saying that. I watched DJ play enough games in high school to be able to say that. And they brought in Hollywood Smothers from NC State, another running back with some shake, with some juke. This Alabama running back room, they don't break tackles. They don't make people miss. They go down on the first contact for the most part. That will change next year. But what really has to change is the offensive line. What has to change beyond that is the philosophy. You don't have to become a wishbone team. You don't have to run for 250 yards a game. You don't have to become a service academy. But you have to be able to run the ball with some success. And I mentioned earlier, this was the most anemic Alabama running game in terms of yards per game since 1955. 104 yards per game Alabama averaged. And there were some high water marks against the likes of tackling dummies, Eastern Illinois. 104 yards a game they ran for. You know how many yards a game Hollywood Smothers averaged at NC State this year? 85.4. So Hollywood Smothers by himself ran for 19 fewer yards a game this past season than Alabama did as a team. So they will be better there if they can get – they're rebuilding the entire offensive line, it appears. Some of it by choice, some of it not. They've got to be better up front. And then there's the big question, who plays quarterback? Ty Simpson's decision will come by the end of this week. We expect if he gets a first-round grade from NFL talent scouts, he will probably turn pro, almost certainly turn pro. If he decides to come back, is he the guy to lead Alabama in 2026? Not if they can't protect him, not if they can't keep him safe, not if they can't keep him from getting banged up the way he was banged up the second half of the year. If Alabama can do those things, choose the right quarterback, rebuild the offensive line, and give those far more talented running backs some running room, then they can throw the ball. Then Ryan Williams can do Ryan Williams things. And then Alabama can be that true SEC and championship contender, national championship contender that Alabama fans expect it to be. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right, that's going to do it for us for today. On Scarbo Knows, I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you are joining us on YouTube, it's Kevin Scarbinsky-Scarbo Knows. Give us a follow. Or a subscription, I should say. Subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that. Don't cost nothing, as Bluto would say, but it does help us out. Follow me on X. I'll be live tweeting the college football playoff semifinals. That's always a lot of fun. Thank you to Brendan Martin and the Sidelines.live network. Thank you to Money Management Services, our sponsor. And thank you again, mostly to you. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you after the semifinals of the college football playoff. See ya.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family, because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.